this guy named Ulrich talked a lot about psychologically supportive design and did research on if you put a painting of a city in a doctor's waiting room, it increases cortisol. But if you put a painting of nature, it decreases. We're seeing that the new type of engagement is actually proof of presence. And that is what a social camera can give, right? The proof that you were actually there rather than the proof that you are someone you're not, or the proof of the perversion of your identity into this caricature. Another project that we're working on is called Checkpoint. And these are portable photo booths that can potentially be portals into the network that we build. So it's really interesting because it's more IRL based. We have a relationship problem, I think. But right now, if we really want to make things better for people in real life and connection, then I think we need to be more in real life rather than just deployed as an app.
Hey, Alanah, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here.
As with all of these, I like to start at the beginning and just get a sense of who you are, a little bit more about your story, where you're from, where you're based, and a brief overview of your professional background.
Sounds good. Myself and most of the team are based in Vancouver, Canada. Future Primitive started in 2021. I joined in February 2022. So that's where my story starts with this company. But prior to that, the tail end years of COVID, I was learning design. So during 2020, I had my first internship. And between then and getting this position, I was actually learning design on my own. My root story is I studied psychology and business in school, and I wanted a way to blend the two together. And I felt like UX design was a good place for that. I did a study abroad in Berlin, and then I was like, okay, I want to move here. So I'm going to become a UX designer and move here. Then COVID hit. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep learning and watching all these YouTube tutorials and try to really get good. And then I can somehow get out there. And then during COVID, it got really bad, especially Europe, everything was locked down. So I ended up getting some freelance contracts in Vancouver. And in particular, my first paid thing was to do interactive audio visuals for a local techno club. And then that introduced me to this local electronic cultural organization. Through them, I was put in contact with RefractionDAO, which was one of these Web3 companies at the time. Actually, they're still around, which is really cool. So I made a website for them. And then through them is how Benny at Future Primitive found my kind of Web3-ish work. And that was one of my portfolio pieces that got us to have a conversation. I joined shortly after. So it's a very serendipitous movement through becoming a designer and then joining and then I guess refining the craft along the way.
Cool. Yeah, I've seen your work via RefractionDAO. And at the time I didn't know it was you, but it's a beautiful website that you created. And I've been to a couple of refraction parties and really like the ethos of the community. I'm curious, was that your entry point into Web3? Were you familiar with the space prior to RefractionDAO, or was that your entree into it?
Yeah, so the first time I bought Bitcoin was 2017. So I was not super early, but I guess I was a bit earlier than the recent boom in 2021. I think how I heard of Web3 initially was at the time I was making random digital art. And 2021 was when that was really picking up. And it seemed like there was so much money. So it was through that I learned about tokenization. But Refraction was cool because they were putting on real events. And that was the first time I got paid in tokens. I don't know where those tokens are at this point, but I got paid in tokens instead of real money. In that way, it was a mental shift for me. And also, maybe I just didn't care about the money and I was just like, I just want to have this job and just make this website. But there's something there when I'm willing to take this internet currency over USDC or something.
Yeah, I think that's true. What was the currency that they paid you in?
I think it was Refract token, but they have a new one now called IRL or something like that.
Okay, cool. And after you were paid in this token for the first time and started to see the larger picture of what was possible with tokenization and some of the other amenities of the blockchain, did you intentionally position yourself to move further into this space?
I would say, honestly, no. not as much as others. So I think at the same time, I guess my Twitter, I started to I'm working on these projects at Future Primitive. We started as a venture studio, so we created Stapleverse and BBC's venture into Web3, and we were working with brands to create their NFT projects. When the community chats would be happening in Discord, I would be in there and they would know who I am. So there was that sort of, people know me as the designer of these projects, as I've always been the singular designer at Future Primitive. So I was always that person who's making all the stuff. And I think at one point I was putting out more of my process, but if it was anything to do with branding, it was more so for me rather than I am just a Web3 person. For sure, I have the knowledge of that deep vertical because I have worked in it for a while, but I haven't ever positioned as that. And at the same time, I was also working casually with my friend in Vancouver who has an agency and who gave me my first design freelance job. And we were making sites for real estate companies and local food joints. So I've always tried to keep a more balanced approach. And I've also found that even when I came in 2021, it seemed like there was already the Web3 designers. There was VectorDAO, and it was really exclusive, and I had applied and not gotten in. There are already these types of people that have branded that way, and for me, I didn't really care so much to be specifically that. Right. That type of distinction is really the most relevant when you're applying for jobs, and it's like Web3 designer must have this experience. So yeah, that was it for me.
And how did you find Kernel?
How was it, or how did I discover it?
Sorry, I guess that could be either one. How did you discover Kernel?
Yeah, one of our previous colleagues at FP Future Primitive had been in KB5 and he spoke really highly of it. And then Benny applied for the whole team. Benny's the CEO, founder of Future Primitive. He applied for the whole team to be a part of it because he thought it was really important to immerse in the culture and the lore.
Cool. Makes sense. And I want to dive into Future Primitive and especially Perma because I think it's a really interesting project. But first, I wanted to kind of ground us because I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and on there you post a few questions that I thought are really interesting to explore, questions that you said you were thinking about yourself. Those being, can interactive technologies create psychologically supportive digital environments for mental well-being? How might we nudge audiences toward happier and healthier selves? And never have we been more connected and this lonely. And why is that? I'm curious what your answers are to those questions.
It's really cool you bring that up because I haven't looked at that for years. And I did that during my first internship, and it was called a behavioral analyst, but I was mostly doing like UX research. It was for an exhibition producer based in Vancouver where they make big museum level interactive tables and projection mapping and these sort of things. And for them, I created this 100+ page document documenting all the different psychological underpinnings of digital design. There's a lot of interesting studies about how they build children's hospitals to have these interactive exhibits inside to increase their mental well-being and distract them. And there's studies about burn victims having their bandages changed in VR, and that decreases their pain perception. Specifically, when I wrote that, I was probably thinking of these papers by this guy named Ulrich, who talked a lot about psychologically supportive design and did research on if you put a painting of a city in a doctor's waiting room, it increases cortisol. But if you put a painting of nature, it decreases. And there's so many visual cues. It lends itself to how crazy it must be to be in the internet in this day and age where we basically have mush and slop and all kinds of context switching. There's this book that I always refer to called How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. And she is a really talented, I believe, Stanford artist, professor, technologist. And she talks about how what we have right now is this extremely fragmented context collapse. I think she refers to this concept as she got it from another paper that she read. But in context collapse, she's positing that the internet is like an apartment building with no walls. It's as if you are moving through each person's room in that apartment with no introduction or pause between all the different sceneries and things that you're going through, and you don't know how to feel, and it leads to desensitization because you cannot even try to make sense of seeing war-torn countries and then seeing people on vacation and then being sold e-commerce. And I think when I first wrote that LinkedIn thing, I was thinking about specifically mental health tech, because I was also working at a brain health startup after that. So I was trying to use digital technologies to keep seniors from cognitive decline by way of doing exercises. But I think now I'm more jaded and privy to the existence of so much digital noise and how that lends itself to feeling a little bit crazy, a little bit like you don't know what's real. And I think that's the
Yeah.
point, right? You cannot parse what's real and what's not. And then you go on Twitter and you see every random PFP person like at Grok, is this real? What is this? No one has critical thinking anymore. And then, of course, the really important and scary desensitization to war, I think, and to seeing graphic, scary things. And then instead of engaging with it as, wow, isn't it crazy that there's literally these kids being starved? It's more about, that's not my kin, that's not my kind. So I'm going to actually say something inflammatory, and then we all spiral into these fights online. But can digital technologies help? Recently, my friend asked me that question, and I started to tell her about Brave browser and all these random internet technologies that are trying to build a better internet. And then she's like, oh, I don't think technology is the solution. And I was like, oh, then why did you ask me about if technology can be the solution? We have a relationship problem, I think.
Yeah. It's a good one-liner for it. I like that you brought up How to Do Nothing. I remember reading that amidst having some of these same experiences, and remember thinking that this is a book that I should read at least once a year, because there are all these nuggets of wisdom. What was coming to mind is her making friends with the crows outside her building, and as a correlation to how we can do nothing while still engaging with the beings around us. And I think that's a good segue you're framing into what Perma is doing. There was a bit in the Perma FAQ, I think. There's a stat that said that about 12 trillion photos have been taken since the invention of photography in the 1800s. And by 2034, we will be creating 20 trillion photos every single year. And I wonder first if you could introduce what Perma is to Future Primitive, and then talk about some of the things that Perma is doing to address the cataclysm of noise and what we can do to try to fix our relationship problem.
Perma is to Future Primitive our step into consumer apps. Whereas before we were building protocols and projects for partners, this is our own thing and our main thing as well. The original ethos came from Benny when he was working at Dapper Lab back in 2017. And it was when the first NFT was created during CryptoKitties. And he had this idea of digital film rolls and minting memories on chain. That was something that always had sat with him. And so when we were building Perma, the initial iteration was actually digital film rolls. Every film roll had 24 exposures. And so you had limited memories that you could take. And the technology behind was that every film roll was a token bound account, which is our protocol that we built. And every token bound account held those 24 exposures. And then within your wallet, you own a token bound account. Token bound accounts are wallet hierarchy structure for NFTs. But why we did it was we wanted to experiment with putting photos on chain and immortalizing those memories, and also creating proof for where those photos had come from. One of the most defining factors about on-chain objects is their trace history through the blockchain and through whatever ledger they're on. And so for us, we were like, what if you could see when a photo was taken and always know when that was and by who? Because right now, you have to really look for that information, and they're all in their own walled gardens, like the profiles and then even the platforms that they're kept on. So in a broader Web3 context, being able to see every photo taken by a person and where they track and even how they intermesh with other people. Like if somebody was tagged in a photo or they left a comment, or being able to have that mapped out as a very open social graph was interesting to us. That was the original start of Perma, and then it started to evolve to become more social and more about the distribution mechanism. Initially, it was about minting that memory on chain, and then we started to explore the metaphor of decentralized systems as the new post system, postal system, as in mail. When you receive an airdrop, it's like you're receiving mail because it's going straight to your address and you actually own something, which is different than sending a DM, which is all happening on someone else's centralized server, where if that goes down or you get banned, you lose access to your own mailbox. But in real life, no one can go and block your mailbox because that is yours and you own those objects. So we thought that was really interesting. And in addition, if you have full ownership and control over the things that you receive and you take action on those things and those are tracked, then you create a social graph and a history that can then be used to help you find the things that you care about most. In the same way an algorithm works, but is like an interpolation of a machine guessing what you would like based on other people with your likeness. We wanted to build a human in the loop suggestion engine where it's as if I go into a library and the librarian is watching me touch all the books and they're recommending me books based on what I literally touched rather than what I might have glanced at or had an inclination towards. So what we ended up building is this reputation system that's built inside Perma, where the photos that I choose to forward to more people, as in I see this photo and I'm like, this is cool, I want to send it to more people, and effectively airdrop it into their mailboxes. That creates a signal in the system that, okay, Alanah likes more nature photos or photos from this person, so then I'll receive more of theirs. So it's like when you subscribe to someone on YouTube, except it's more automatic and it's more based on what I actually do and take action on. But what's cool about this is it's constrained to a context where every photo on Perma is taken in the present. There's no uploads and no edits and there's no AI. You're taking actions on these extremely raw photos. It's photos of people going about their day, something they ate or a friend that they saw. And so the signal is also a lot more muted and lower maybe than someone interacting with extremely polarizing content on social media. I'm sure you've experienced it where you like one thing that's like very polarized and then your whole feed is that thing over and over. It puts you into this like mindset where you're like, oh wow, this thing is all that's happening in the world, but really it's just the algorithms like, okay, let me feed you more of that, versus our human algorithm is, let me show you more of what's happening in real life for these people. So yeah, that's where Perma is right now. And we're in the App Store, so you can try it if you have an iOS device.
Cool. That's awesome. Something like that is really necessary. You hinted at it earlier that platforms essentially incentivize you to be polarizing, which I think has yielded some of the relationship problem that you mentioned earlier, and some of the desensitization that we have to things like war and poverty and questions of verification and what is real. Trying to hone in on something that is rooted in a less curated, less glossy version of the truth feels really powerful. There was a line somewhere, I think it was maybe in the Figma profile or the Figma page, that houses the Perma lore. In the era of craft, real is better than perfect. And I wonder, what has been the response to that? The big social platform that has emerged post TikTok was Be Real, which seemed to be a nod at something similar, an idea that was similar, something more authentic. And I'm curious, what's been the response so far to Perma in that vein?
We haven't done that much marketing, so I will preface the pickup hasn't been as strong, but I think also because there just needs to be more done on that front. We do have some users, about 50 people are on there right now. For those who really enjoy it, they say that it feels a bit like Arena, which is really nice. That's a really great comment. Arena is really interesting because Arena is like a Pinterest for ideas, but everyone on there is some sort of creative. And all the things on there, it's not about attribution, but it's more about how you categorize ideas and then how those are all connected. But it has a very intentional and slow and meaningful feeling to it. You'll stumble upon somebody's collection of images and it's memes that make my heart feel like applesauce. And you're like, I don't know what that means, but I can understand that from these images. It's very legit and very authentic. People have said that sort of thing where you go on Perma and there's not that much that's stimulating, but if you see someone you know, you're like, oh, that's cool. They're doing this today. Or people have said that in particular, it's been really fun to archive their days because they know that the photos are permanent. They actually use it more for them. And we meant it to be more of a social experience, but where they find value is actually using it for them and feeling like they're creating an archive of their life over time. That's something that I've been personally really interested in is digital legacy building and what that looks like. What does archaeology look like in an era where there's so much stuff and everyone's stuff is real and not? And how do you plot the history and who writes that history? So it's interesting for people to be able to time capsule their days. But I think that for us, we're still trying to figure out how to connect people because it's not enough to become that big platform that rivals Instagram. We're still figuring out how to build this sort of IRL social network that we all envision while still keeping true to that ethos.
Yeah, makes sense. And I'm curious from a grander vision perspective. I know this is your first foray into consumer apps, but some of the larger intentions I was reading about via Perma is reimagining the JPEG as the primitive of what an image is online, like upgrading that format to create a new standard that encodes authenticity and provenance, and developing an on-chain algorithm to replace black box feeds. You were alluding to that. And do you see the social camera as a means of working toward those ends in any way?
Yeah, I think that the relationship with our handheld cameras definitely has opportunity for change. Right now, we all have the ability to film and capture, but when it's unintentional, it's community policing panopticon. I was on Twitter, and of course, this could just be my algorithm trying to make me mad, but there's this video that came up, and it was this guy filming a parking lot with people going by, and this woman goes up to him and is like, why are you filming this area? And he's like, I'm just practicing my right to freedom of press. I'm seeing if you people are okay with my right to freedom of press. And she's like, what press are you with? And he's like, social media. I know it goes on, and she's like, well, what is this for? And he's like, no, it's my freedom. It's my freedom. And all this, I can, and so I will mentality. I think with social cameras, we're so used to seeing ourselves and like making ourselves into the influencer or the content creator or even the person posing in front of the camera that we're almost doing it with Tourette's or something. That's my hot take. I was at a restaurant last night and there's a young girl looking like she was live streaming the meal. And it's just a step up from a tablet kid, right? We're so used to being in front of the screen, and that's not inherently a bad thing. But what else could a camera be other than something to watch and track and monetize and objectify us in that way? So actually another project that we're working on is called Checkpoint. And these are portable photo booths that could potentially be portals into the network that we build. So it's really interesting because with this project, it's way more IRL based, whereas Perma is an app. Point has these photo booths in about 23 placements in New York. We have a couple in LA, and we have about 3 in Vancouver now. And each of these checkpoints print these receipts that pertain to the partner's place that we're in. So this is at a place called Le Pere, and then it would have the photo or just experimenting with what else could be on the receipt. But it's really cool because there's been about 10,000 photos per week or so, and they can scan the QR code to download the high-res photo, and we're building out more features. What if you could join an exclusive IRL network based on where you went? Similar to Perma, we're seeing that the new type of engagement is actually proof of presence. And that is what a social camera can give, right? The proof that you were actually there rather than the proof that you are someone you're not, or the proof of the perversion of your identity into this caricature. So we're exploring that right now. And that's been a little bit of an internal shift of focus that's starting to happen. We still want to obviously stick to the ethos of Perma and even some of the software that might reappear in this new form. But right now, if we really want to make things better for people in real life and connection, then I think we need to be more in real life rather than just deployed as an app.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's important. So where you are today, the main intention of this new media series is to amplify the stories of Kernel Fellows in order to get support, whatever support they might need to meet them where they are with whatever challenges they're facing. And what do you need today, either via Future Primitive or some of your other personal projects? How can Kernel support you?
Yeah, I think we are looking to raise in the near future. So if there are investors who align with our mission, we're also expanding the checkpoint network. So if there are people with businesses, in particular third spaces we're really interested in, who would want to host a checkpoint and be a part of the network, that would be super cool. If there are people that are just liking the ideas that I shared, I'm super down to chat. And if they have ideas or they've thought about anything similar, yeah, super down to connect.
Cool. Noted. All good things. I also wanted to briefly give you an opportunity to talk about Highly Sensitive, if you'd like, because I came across it and thought it was an interesting project, but couldn't find that much about it.
Oh yeah, so that is my personal foray into clothing. The same time I started learning design, my mom taught me how to sew, and so I started sewing these free patterns online, and then I realized anyone can do this. Anyone can sew their own clothes and upcycle and just get fabric from their local upcycling dealers. I've been slowly working on this project just on my own, and I have a couple patterns that I've made that I haven't posted and some clothing and stuff. So yeah, it's basically my upcycling practice that I want to create open source patterns so that when people purchase a piece by me, they can have the pattern for free and learn to do it themselves. And trying to create a product that hopefully ends up in less textile waste, and that can also teach people a new skill that they can get excited about it, and just, yeah, the joys of sewing and crafting.
Cool. I love that. I will stay tuned to that. I've been meaning to learn how to sew. It's a long overdue skill I don't have. So that's cool. I also think the merch that the Future Primitive has is very cool. I think I'm going to get one of those blocks of culture tees.
Oh, amazing. That's super exciting.
Yeah, it's very cool. Did you design those as well?
No, so it was actually our creative director, Greg, who put those together. But Greg is awesome. He was the previous creative director at Billionaire Boys Club for 8 years. So he's bringing all that clothing expertise with us.
Cool. Cool, Alanah. I think we touched on all the main points.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thanks for having me. And it was really great getting to articulate all the things.